Let's spin up the assault cannons one last time. It's the end of tank week and we're going to look at the Land Raider, Crusader and Redeemer. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the tactics-based 40k channel, currently helping lead your Astartes forces to victory on the tabletop. We've been through every tracked tank in the Codex this week, besides two, so let's take a look at the Land Raider Crusader and Land Raider Redeemer. Two Land Raider variants that will look forward to purging the Xenos at close range. Now we've already done a video on Land Raiders today. If you haven't seen it already, I'd recommend checking out my Land Raider with las cannons video first, as I might be a bit more brief about some of the similar areas for these guys. We'll take a look at the unit stats, any ways that we can make them excel on the tabletop, and how I'd run one optimally in a Space Marine army list. So the Land Raider Crusader is the variant Land Raider that is armed with a pair of Hurricane Bolters and a twin assault cannon, and the Land Raider Redeemer switches out those Hurricane Bolters for the massive Flamestorm cannons. Both excel at breaking the enemy's lines and putting out devastating close-range firepower into the heart of the foe. So without further ado, let's get into their rules. Both share the same profile as the Land Raider that we mentioned in the previous video. So movement of 10, weapon skill 6, ballistic skill 3 up, strength 8, toughness 8, 16 wounds, 6 attacks, leadership 9 and a 2 up save. When it degrades to 8 wounds or less, its movement drops to 5 and ballistic skill to 4 up, and when it drops to 4 wounds, its movement drops to 3 and its ballistic skill becomes only 5 up. Obviously the Redeemer does not care quite so much about being degraded, as its main weapons being auto-hitting. Both of these tanks are heavy support choices for Codex Space Marines, and they're both armed with a hull-mounted twin assault cannon, and then either the pair of Hurricane Bolters in the case of the Crusader, or a pair of Flamestorm cannons in the case of the Redeemer. Based with no further upgrades, the Land Raider Crusader costs you 264 points, and the Land Raider Redeemer costs 274 points, so that puts them both slightly cheaper than the Land Raider with las cannons, which clocks in at 277. So, what are the pros and cons of both of their main guns? The Hurricane Bolters on the Land Raider Crusader are both rapid-fire 6 bolter shots, so if it moves they will be getting a total of 12 shots at 24-inch range, or 24 shots within half range. If it stays put, it will be able to activate the Bolter Discipline special rule and fire those 24 shots all the way up to 24-inch range. So this is a very solid amount of anti-infantry firepower pouring out of this tank. If you give it a Storm Bolter as well, then that'll be 40 shots coming out of it, including the twin assault cannon. The Redeemer, on the other hand, has two Flamestorm cannons. They're heavy D6, 12-inch range guns with strength 6, AP-2, and 2 damage. As they're heavy, in the Devastator Doctrine they'll be AP-3. The 12-inch range is quite useful on these things, because it means that if your opponent wants to directly charge the Redeemer, unless he has some way of stopping Overwatch or charges them out of line of sight, then he'll definitely be taking 2d6 of these very nasty shots that auto hit on Overwatch. So unless your opponent is very tough or has a very large unit charging, they won't be assaulting that Land Raider at the Redeemer without some heavy casualties. Both of the models can take a Storm Bolter, Hunter-Killer Missile, or Multi-Melter. I'd always take the Storm Bolter, particularly as these tanks will be moving forward, so should well be within 24 inches to use that. The Hunter-Killer Missile is a bit of a take or leave. I'd probably usually take it on Land Raiders, to be honest, because they always ignore the penalty for moving and shooting heavy weapons, and if you fire it off turn 1, then it'll be AP-3 in Devastator Doctrine. It's only 6 points, so it doesn't really hurt. Multi-Melter is a bit more interesting. Again, I could easily see people including this, but I could easily see people leaving it off. It gives you a decent damage increase, but you do pay 22 points for that privilege. Because these tanks will be moving forwards, they will typically be within 24-inch range, so you can fire it at something, but you might not necessarily be able to fire it at a hard target, say if your opponent is screening all of his tanks with a bunch of infantry. On the other hand, the Land Raider is a very big durable platform. It will likely get to fire a few times before the opponent manages to deal with it, so really it's kind of up to you on that one. Both models have an improved transport capacity compared with the regular Land Raider. The Land Raider Crusader has 16 model transport capacity, and Terminators take up 2 slots, and Centurions take up 3 slots, and Primaris don't like getting in tracked vehicles, so they can't come in. That means that you could potentially have 5 Centurions inside this thing, or 8 Terminators, which is quite nice. The Land Raider Redeemer still has more than the standard Land Raider, but it only has 12 slots, so that means 12 regular Marines or characters, 6 Terminators or 4 Centurions. The expanded transport capacity on both of these guys definitely makes them more viable as a transport. They have the Angels of Death special rule, which gives them access to combat doctrines. The assault cannon will be much improved by the heavy doctrine, going to AP-2, and the Crusader will also benefit from the tactical doctrine should you go into it, for an AP-1 on all of those bolter shots. It also gives them the bolter discipline for the Storm Bolter and those Hurricane Bolters, as we discussed. Unfortunately, the way that Power of the Machine Spirit is worded means that you still need to be stationary to trigger bolter discipline. As Power of the Machine Spirit, their next special rule only applies to heavy weapons, and it means that they ignore the penalty for moving and firing them. It has a decidedly weird rule called Frag Assault Launchers, which I'll be honest, until reading this right now, I didn't realise was a thing. In the old Codex, the Frag Assault Launchers gave your charging models inside the tank frag grenades, so it made them better on the charge. Now, however, they only apply if the Land Raider, Crusader or Redeemer actually makes a charge itself, and then one enemy unit within 1 inch of it after it's made the charge move suffers D3 mortal wounds on the roll of a 4-up. Unless you actually need the Land Raider to soak up Overwatch for a charging unit that's about to make a charge nearby, I would seriously not recommend charging your Land Raider into an enemy unit, particularly not on a 4-up chance to do D3 mortal wounds. Its combat profile is pretty awful, even though it does get 6 attacks, they only hit on 6, and you'll stop yourself shooting in the next shooting phase. You will also deny yourself any overwatch should the opponent want to charge you with another scary threat, which is very powerful on both of them because they have so many shots, but on the Land Raider Redeemer, because it auto hits an overwatch, you'd be really silly to miss out on that. Basically, unless you need this charge move to win a game or take an objective, and say you're charging a 1 wound model that absolutely has to die that turn, I would not bother ever making a charge to utilise this rule. They have smoke launchers, which if you forego shooting means that you'll be -1 to hit in your opponent's next shooting phase, which could potentially be useful if they have no valid targets, which could be the case because they have quite short range on a lot of their weapons, so it's worth bearing in mind as they get into position. They also have the Explode special rule, which is if the model is destroyed, on the roll of a 6, everything around it within 6 inches takes D6 mortal wounds, which, as we said in the previous video, is incredibly nasty. You don't want this happening in your own lines, but if it's happening in your opponent's lines, you can use the stratagem Vengeance of the Machine Spirit to make this happen automatically, and that could be a horrendously damaging move. So overall, these are both close-range versions of the Land Raider, with expanded transport capacity that's both specialised mainly in anti-infantry firepower. You could genuinely use them to move a slow-moving unit up into the middle of the battlefield, or you could use particularly the Land Raider Crusader as a durable battle line tank to put out a bunch of anti-infantry firepower. So what buffs can we give these tanks then? As we mentioned, combat doctrines are quite a big help. The Land Raider Redeemer basically always wants to be in Devastator Doctrine, but the Land Raider Crusader would pretty much equally be happy in Tactical Doctrine, as about half of its firepower is in the Hurricane Bolters and half in the Twin Assault Cannons. There are a number of different chapter traits that are useful for both of these. The Ultramarines trait is particularly handy for these close combat Land Raiders, as it will allow them to fall back from combat and still shoot. On an Ultramarines Redeemer, the -1 to hit won't even apply, so it can merrily fall back and then toast the Heretics and Xenos without any worries about being at -1 to hit. Ultramarines is also a good choice for the Land Raider Crusader, as when they're in the Tactical Doctrine, it will count as being stationary the entire time, so that means it can move the full 10 inches and still rapid fire its Hurricane Bolters all the way out to 24 inches and have AP-1 on them when they do so. White Scars is definitely an interesting choice for Land Raiders, mainly because of their ability to transport assault infantry. They have a stratagem that will allow a unit to get out of a Land Raider after it has moved, to unleash some punishing close-range firepower on the foe. or for a unit of, say, assault centurions getting out of a Land Raider Crusader, they'll be able to get out 3 inches plus the base of the model, and then move, advance, and charge, so that gives them a very scary threat range out of the bunker that is the Land Raider Crusader. Iron Hands is always amazing for vehicles. 6-up Feel No Pain is great on big models. Reduced Degrading is very good on vehicles, and their 5+ Overwatch could be particularly punishing on a Land Raider Crusader. With so many shots, you can reliably get a lot of hits if someone decides to charge it directly. Salamanders, if the rumour for their new doctrine is correct, then they will have an additional +1 to wound on those Flamestorm cannons, and +1 to wound if you take the top multi-melter. Plus, with their nice rerolls, they'll be able to reroll the hit and wound roll of that multi-melter, so it's certainly worth taking if you're a Salamanders player. Crimson Fists and Imperial Fists will both get a lot out of the Hurricane Bolter variant, as they have a massive boost to their bolter efficiency due to getting extra hits on 6s, and both the Crimson Fists bonus against hordes and the Imperial Fists ignore cover are nice to have too. And finally, Black Templars, the chapter that created the Land Raider Crusader, do get a little bit out of it, because if they put any assault units in there, they'll be able to reroll charges. If you're running a big firepower heavy tank such as the Land Raider, then it's worth thinking about getting captains and lieutenants to provide rerolls to hit and wound. Obviously, captains and chapter masters won't be quite as important on the Land Raider Redeemer, which auto hits with its Flamestorm cannons. Chaplains could also be potentially powerful, with either the +1 to hit litany or the +1 to wound at the nearest target litany, which could be amazing on the Land Raider Crusader with all of those strength 4 shots. I could certainly see an Ultramarines Land Raider Crusader with Cassius nearby putting in some work to get both of those buffs off in theory. Also, Tech Marines or Iron Father Thyros could really help repair them both. As I mentioned in brief earlier, the stratagem Vengeance of the Machine Spirit has the potential to turn your Land Raider into a giant bomb when it dies. This is going to be a lot more relevant on these two variants compared with the standard Land Raider, as these guys are a lot more likely to be advancing forwards into the heart of the enemy. For 2 CP, it will automatically explode and hand out d6 mortal wounds to every unit within 6 inches of it, which has the potential to be game-changing in the right circumstances. The only downside of this is that your opponent has to trigger it themselves by destroying it, so if they know that you have this stratagem in your pocket, they might think about not blowing up the Land Raider when they have any key units too close to it. So out of these Assault Land Raider variants, which one would I run myself? To be honest, I much prefer the Crusader to the Redeemer for quite a number of reasons. It's a little cheaper, it has a little bigger transport capacity, but mostly because its effective range is 24 inches rather than just 12 inches, which it needs to be if it's ever going to use those Flamestorm cannons. At 12-inch range, you put yourself at really high risk of getting charged and locked up by the enemy. I know you might say that it's got massive overwatch, so that shouldn't happen very often, but there are just too many situations which it could easily happen for me. For example, your opponent could charge from behind a ruin where the Land Raider couldn't see. It could charge with a model that ignores overwatch via many means that are available throughout the codexes. You could charge the unit next door to the Land Raider Redeemer and then consolidate into it, so you never have to select it as a target for the charge. Or you could just charge it with something tanky enough that it doesn't really care about the Flamestorm cannons, say like a Chaos Knight or a cheap transport vehicle like a Rhino. If your opponent manages to do any of these, then it's not going to be firing in your next shooting phase, and it'll be a very, very expensive tank that's just not doing anything for you. That's why I think that the Ultramarines trait is such a good one for Land Raider Crusaders and Redeemers, because they will prevent this from having too much of an impact and makes them a lot more viable. I think the biggest argument for using the Land Raider Crusader would be to transport a scary close combat threat, such as Assault Centurions or Vanguard Veterans up the field in safety. If you moved it 10 inches forward turn 1, then sure, yes, the enemy might tag it in close combat, but then your scary assault unit next turn could get out and give whatever did that a good kicking. I particularly like the idea of using Assault Centurions in this way, because they're very scary, powerful units all round, but lack a way to get them up the field quickly. White Scars makes this tactic even more effective, particularly with the stratagem to move and then get out and then still move with the unit that got out afterwards. So you could zoom up a Land Raider Crusader in the middle of your forces, get out the Assault Centurion unit, move with them, and then unleash a whole load of flamer and bolter shots, and present a threat that your opponent needs to deal with turn 1. Though to be fair, I do think Raven Guard are the optimal way to deliver Assault Centurions, with their fancy Warlord trait and deep striking ability. So overall, I'd say I can see a number of equally viable ways to run both the Land Raider, Crusader and Redeemer. If I were using them, I would take the additional Storm Bolter, start them in the middle of the field, ideally with a heavy melee threat in them, move them up turn 1, unleash a lot of their close range firepower, and get the melee threat out turn 2 to charge your opponent. Hopefully, if you have enough threats in your list, the Land Raider will survive, or even if it doesn't, it means that your opponent just has to dedicate a lot of firepower to removing it. I'd consider using prepared positions in any list that has a Land Raider in, to get it a 1+ save in cover on the first turn. All in all, I think that the Land Raider, Crusader and Redeemer aren't the most competitive choice in the Space Marine list. In terms of raw firepower, they're probably outshone by their Repulsor counterpart, though obviously they're completely different in terms of which units they can transport. The Repulsor is a fair bit less durable, but then it can fly so it can fall back and shoot, which is a real benefit in such a big scary unit. I don't think that I would run a Land Raider, Crusader or Redeemer in any competitive Space Marine list that I'm running at the moment, but I can certainly see that they have a niche operating as a battlefield bunker for all sorts of Space Marine threats, as they can transport virtually any type of infantry that isn't Primaris. As per usual, if you can see anything that I missed in the video and any potential strong uses of either of these units, then let me know down in the comments. This one brings us to the end of Tank Week, so next week we'll be moving on to a bunch of other units in the Space Marine Codex. Expect videos on the Repulsor, Thunderfire Cannon, and the White Scars Codex to be coming out sometime in the next week. As always, thanks for listening, and feel free to subscribe if you'd like to see similar videos like this. I'll see you guys in the next video.